Teenagers will reject you 4 out of 5 times when you ask them to do something. So the key is to ask 5 times as much. They might act like they don't want us around or they don't want to do stuff with us, but deep down, that connection is still really important to them. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of parents make is they assume the face value of what the teenager says. And really, there's a big part of them that still does want to be connected.
Welcome to Atypical Kids Mindful Parents podcast, the neurodiversity affirming parenting podcast that helps parents feel less alone. I'm Kate Lynch, a mindfulness coach and parent of an amazing atypical kid. I interview parents and experts who share my mission to create a kinder, more inclusive future. You can look forward to grounding practices, relatable parenting stories, and groundbreaking strategies. If you long to embody mindfulness and compassion in your parenting life, follow us here for connection, strategies, and support. Let's go on this journey together.
This is Sarah Rosensweet, Peaceful Parenting. I'm so excited to get to chat with you about one of my special interests right now, which is Adolescence on Netflix, not just generally adolescence, although that's a great topic too.
I'm happy we got this put together, planned it last night, and here we are. So it's awesome.
That's what I love about live. Is we can just go. And then if we want to share the recording, we can. There's lots of opportunities. You have 2 kids, right?
I have 3. I have a
3.
son who's 24, a son who's 21, and a daughter who's almost 18. We've already said that there could be spoilers here, right?
Yes, okay. Spoilers. If you haven't watched it, go watch it, then come back and watch this. When you watched Netflix's Adolescence, what was like the very first thing that came to mind as you're watching it, like it's related to your own family? Was there anything that you were just like, oh, or anything like that?
No, I definitely didn't find I could relate to it personally in terms of that's the kind of relationship that I had with my kids when they were teenagers.
Yeah.
But as a parenting coach, people have been talking about how it's warning against toxic masculinity and social media as dangerous for our kids, which I 100% agree with. And I thought that the most important part was it was about how the family had lost connection with their child. In the end, they talked about how he would just come home and go up to his room and stay on his computer until 1 a.m. And it sounded like they'd really lost connection with him. And I have a second point about peaceful parenting and the show, but I don't know if you want to talk about connection first before I say my other big idea that I thought about it.
I would love to, because I felt the same way. And I think when I read your email about it, that was when I was like, I want to talk with Sarah about this, because that was what I felt too. Like, sure, social media, but all of that is a symptom of the lack of connection.
The connection is so protective for our children.
Yeah, I have chills thinking about that. Like, I feel it through my whole body. Like, I try so hard, but I am feeling that change. I don't know if it's a loss of connection. I really hope it's not. My son's 14. He's a freshman in high school. He's autistic and ADHD and doing wonderfully in school. And as he gains more independence, I'm definitely finding he's using me as the one to push back on. And that's always been the case. I'm the closest one, so he pushes back. But I feel like it takes more work to hold the connection, also adapt.
Yeah, it's natural for teenagers. A couple thoughts on that, because I've raised 2 sons, and this applies to all teenagers, that you ask them if they want to do something. And I read some in one of my favorite parenting teenagers book. It's called Staying Connected to Your Teenager by Michael Riera, Riera. It's not a very well-known book, but it's an excellent book about parenting teenagers. And he says teenagers will reject you 4 out of 5 times when you ask them to do something. So the key is to ask 5 times as much. I think that's really true. They might act like they don't want us around or they don't want to do stuff with us, but deep down, that connection is still really important to them. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of parents make is they assume the face value of what the teenager says. And really, there's a big part of them that still does want to be connected. My oldest son is really sensitive and very attuned to his own feelings. And when he was around that age, your son's age, and he still says this at 24, he says, I hate that I want to talk to you about this stuff. Like whatever the important thing is that's happening to him, I hate that I want to talk to you about this. I think there's this cultural message, especially for teenage boys, that you shouldn't be close to your parents, right? And so he feels this inner conflict of, I really want to talk to my mom about this important thing that's happening, but I feel like, I don't know if it makes him feel like too soft or wimpy or something like that, speaking of the toxic masculinity. But I think that, that they do still want to talk to us about stuff. But it is hard, especially for mothers and sons, because of that separation and the message that is, you shouldn't be close to your mom because then you're a mama's boy and you're not manly or whatever.
All of that. Absolutely. Yeah. And, the one thing I think we got right and we still are getting right is something I saw that broke my heart in Adolescence, especially in that last episode, when they were talking about his interests, how they really didn't value or validate his interests when he was younger.
Yes.
And he felt so much shame that he couldn't do what his dad
himself.
was hoping for.
That was the
Yeah, he
second
was
piece that
like,
I was going to
fit
talk
in.
to you about is the shame. He talked to his counselor when he was in that prison. He said, my dad took me to play football, soccer, I guess is what we would say. And I was really bad at it. And I would look at him after I messed up and he couldn't even look at me. He recognized, and his dad talked about that also in the last episode, about how ashamed he felt. He felt ashamed. The dad felt ashamed for feeling ashamed. And the son felt ashamed that his dad was ashamed of him, that he wasn't good at football. And that was just heartbreaking because what our kids need most from us is to feel lovable and worthy.
Yeah.
Even if they're artists instead of jocks. That's what that kid was. They talked about how he loved to draw and he was a really good artist. I think that dad, they were, if we can say good parents, like I don't like to say good parents and bad parents, but I do think they were doing the best they could with what they knew to do and what they thought was the right thing to do. And I imagine that dad, the character, because he was a pretty emotionally sensitive man, is the impression that I got from the show. And I think that he felt his job was to toughen up his son. I think that he was responding to cultural pressure, like this is how you make a man, right? He's got to be good at sports and have big muscles. And I think that if that dad had permission to love and accept his son for who he was, I don't think they would have gotten to that place.
It's so heartbreaking. I also think like the dad had a lot of emotional immaturity and reactivity that he hadn't worked through.
He talked about being whipped. He talked about being beaten by his father.
So he did better than his dad for sure. His son knew that. He was like, he never hit me. Cycle breaking is revolutionary work and protective of our children, girls, boys, everyone. And what I don't know if you wanted to talk about this, the character of the mom, so beautifully played. A people pleaser, an appeaser, someone who was also in a trauma cycle.
Let's go back to if you don't mind, let's go back to the shame piece again and the feeling lovable and worthy from your parents. I have interviewed so many people on my podcast who talked about being bullied as young people. And this kid was bullied, right? That was another big theme of adolescence, was his bullying, which is what he was lashing back against this girl who had bullied him. Not that anyone deserves to die for bullying somebody else, but he was bullied and it really affected his sense of self-worth. And what I've heard from people who were bullied as children was that your parents giving you specific, like explicit messages that you are lovable and worthy was protective for them. I was tortured at school, but when I came home, my parents made me feel like I was wonderful and there was nothing wrong with me and made me feel lovable and worthy. And that's what got me through those years of being bullied or even just mildly like being excluded or something like that.
Or teased.
Yeah. That if you at home feel that you're, that unconditional positive regard that we talk about and that you're lovable and worthy and that your parents think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, that is very protective.
Yeah. That is something my mom got right. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, so I didn't have a lot of stability. And one school, people thought I was a French exchange student, even though I didn't speak a word of French, because I wore like red lipstick and hats.
Did you have a beret? Did you wear a beret?
I wasn't wearing a beret, but I was coming from like a more artsy district, and that was my background as well. And then coming to this very rural school, and they thought I was a French exchange student. It wasn't like I was being bullied, but I certainly...
You were an outsider, though.
Yeah, I was always an outsider growing up. When they sent us home because we were wearing clothes that they thought were inappropriate, she would come into the school and fight for us. She always says that being weird is so cool and so much cooler.
I love that.
So she did that. My son doesn't seem to have a lot of that like comparison. I think from the autism, he's much more self-directed and self-driven.
Certain schools, being weird or being quirky is much more accepted than in other areas of the country or neighborhoods or whatever. So hopefully he's in a place that appreciates his weirdness.
We made sure of that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I realized when I had an exercise once that I had to talk about my personal values. And I realized that embracing weirdness is like right up there in my top 5 personal values.
I love that. I want to get to know the weird side of Sarah.
Yeah, if you knew me outside of my newsletters, you'd probably see it. But it's funny because I always found this hard as a kid too, as a teenager and young person. I present as typical, like how I dress and the different things about me. But like inside, I'm super weird.
Yeah, I had one summer when I had a rainbow streak in my hair, and I was like, I finally feel like I look on the outside like I am on the inside. Middle-aged white lady.
Yeah, totally. I've been cultivating that a little bit lately and I realized that I didn't like a lot of the clothes that I had. I just have a lot of plain things, and I decided to make more of an effort to try to express myself with my clothes. And one day I was going out and my daughter said to me, "You look crazy, Mom." It's the outfit that I had. It was a lot of color. And then when I saw my husband later that night, he said to me, "You look like a fun lady." And I was like, I like that much better. He's like, "You look like a woman whose kids are grown up and almost out of the house and that you're looking for a good time." And I was like, all right, that's much better than "You look crazy, Mom."
Oh, and how you interpret language, though. That's a compliment coming from a 17-year-old.
Yeah. If you want to talk about the mom, I've got time if you do. I'm enjoying talking to you, and hopefully the people who are on are enjoying our very circuitous conversation. Do you have ADHD?
Probably.
Yeah. Because there's certain people that we can have these ADHD conversations where you're like going on all these different tangents.
I definitely am an HSP. I figured that out, but I haven't gone through any diagnosis process officially.
2 interesting things from that. I've heard somebody talk about how HSP, and I'm not sure all of this resonates with you, but I think this is really interesting, that HSP is autism with privilege. With privilege, not necessarily financial, but like support around you.
Possible.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Possible, but it's also autism with like highly attuned, maybe from childhood trauma, but highly attuned social awareness.
People skills, yeah.
So it's definitely something that maybe one day I'll be able to afford for someone to tease out and give me letters and answers. But for now, I've grown to accept, embrace, and accommodate my needs. And that's, thanks to my son. Like I wouldn't have known about the sensory sensitivities. I would have just thought I was being
too sensitive,
being a baby and and like, why am I so tired? And why getting out in social situations leaves me feeling like I've been hit by a truck the next day.
The other thing I was going to say, the ADHD thing, is there's this podcast, Neurodivergent Insights. Megan Annan.
She's on here. She's on Substack.
Yeah. She has a podcast called Neurodivergent Insights, I'm pretty sure. And they had this episode series where they went through the DSM criteria for ADHD and talked about both of the hosts have ADHD, and they talked about what each criteria was and how those show up for them. And I was newly aware of my ADHD when I listened to that. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is ADHD? Like with everything. I was like, I had no idea that that other people's brains, it's hard not to assume that other people's brains work the same way that your brain works, which is, I think, due to a lot of misunderstandings in like neurodivergent, neurotypical world. But all of these things they were talking about, I was like, that's just how I think, or that's just what I do. And I couldn't believe that those were like all ADHD things. It kind of blew my mind. So you might want to check that out and see if that resonates for you at all.
Yeah. Yeah, she's on here and she just published a book.
Self-Care for Autistic People is one of her books, but I'm not sure if she has a new one.
Yeah, I think it's a new one. Yeah. And maybe it's not out yet. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So shall we talk about the mom?
Sure. Yeah. So you tell me what you thought of the mom, because I definitely felt like I paid a lot more attention to the dad in that than I did to the mom. But what were your thoughts on the mom?
I just immediately found that like fawning or appeasement, I felt it, I felt it so deeply because I've been in relationships like that. And I think my upbringing was also like that. A lot of kids whose parents are alcoholics, a lot of people who've been in abusive relationships, they get this very highly attuned, finely tuned ability to not, I won't say manipulate, but adjust their nervous system.
It's what people call the fawn. That's the
Yeah,
have you heard the fawn of the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn?
Yeah, that's what I said.
The way to keep yourself safe when things are chaotic.
And your other child safe and all your kids, everyone, like the daughter too, has learned this ability. Yeah. So, okay, we'll pivot. We'll pivot again. We'll pivot again.
Yeah.
Oh, that wasn't so bad when you attacked that teenager on a bike in the parking lot. Oh, we'll just ignore that.
So interesting, because I definitely can see what you mean. And I wasn't, I've only watched it once. I don't know if you've watched it more than once.
Yeah, I've only watched it once. I want to go back and watch it again.
Yeah, I haven't, I don't know. So actually I watched the last episode twice because my daughter had watched the first 3 with us and then we watched the last one without her. So I told her I'd watch it again with her, and it was even more painful the second time through. But what I was saying is I didn't notice that as much. And I can see what you're talking about really clearly with the mom.
Yeah, even from the very first episode, her saying to her husband, okay, but remember the needles, she was hypervigilant.
Yeah.
The entire time, managing his every kind of shift, his emotional dysregulation, she was regulating for him. And she probably did that with her son, which is something she mentioned at the end.
Yeah, she said we should have paid more attention to his temper.
And done something about it. I don't know what you can do at that point.
Yeah. I loved how they, at the end, were really reflective and honest with themselves, because I have heard of people who lose a child and then go on to blame everybody else. And not that they lost their child, but that they were actually pretty honest with themselves at the end for everything that they could have done differently, which I thought was really, really
beautiful.
Good.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And heartbreaking to see them realize that.
And the beginning of healing. Something sparked that maybe could start to create some healing.
Yeah. And we've got to mention before we go how amazing the one-shot thing was.
Yeah. And I didn't even notice it
going in. So I'm keeping an eye out for that. My husband and I, he used to be a filmmaker, and we were talking about it afterwards. And especially the last episode, to go from all the different emotions that parents went into and out of, and to do that in real time. Like the dad come home from the Home Depot store, change his shirt, wash his hands, like in real time as the mom's talking to the daughter. And then that emotion coming up in his room. I think actors generally have time, if they're going to film a scene, they have time to get themselves in the headspace of the scene. But they were going through it in real time, which was really amazing to think about. What a good actor you'd have to be to do that.
Absolutely. And hopefully no one's watching this who has not already seen it. If you haven't seen it, even if you're highly sensitive, you might need to take it in little bits. And look, we can have a watch party and I'll stay on with you while you're watching it. We can do it all together as a group and talk about it, because I think it is just incredibly important, especially if you're raising adolescents now or pre-adolescents.
100%. I've heard complaints say it's too sensational, what happened. And yes, most kids who are raised like that boy was, they don't end up murdering somebody. However, everything that led up to that, I thought was really realistic. And you can't make a TV show without something that's going to catch people's attention. And that was the event that caught everyone's attention.
Yeah. 2 things just popped into my head. The first is 1 in 5 women are assaulted.
Yeah.
1 in 5. And they're not necessarily murdered, but there's a big problem worldwide.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, if she hadn't been murdered, they wouldn't have had an excuse to make it so granularly about him.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that she was gone made them able to really, and it's 3 men creating this. People were complaining that it wasn't enough about her, but I think that was the point. that this is all about how we got here, how we're presently dealing with it, and what we can do moving forward. Or the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Deal with that, to put the focus on that.
Yeah. And true, if you want people to be rehabilitated, it's not just about locking them up, right? It's understanding, like, how did they get there? How can we make changes? How can we help them heal? Understand why. It's a bit pat, but that expression, hurt people, is so true.
And dehumanizing someone doesn't give them an opportunity to change and improve and rehabilitate. Seeing the humanity there. And there's the flip side of so many cases in this country, at least, where the focus is on, oh, the boy who did this terrible thing, it'll ruin his life if we prosecute him. Like, that's not okay either. Accountability is important in changing.
Yeah, both. It's a both and.
Yeah.
Accountability and also understanding how somebody got there and hopefully helping them so they can change and grow and not be the perpetrators anymore.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I feel like cycle breaking and peaceful parenting are the most radical thing we could do right now. Yeah. Be radical. Put on your crazy outfits.
That's right. Alfie Kohn was on my podcast this week. You're familiar with his work.
Yes.
And it hit me again when I was interviewing him. And actually, one of his books is really not very well known, but I just read it for the interview, The Myth of the Spoiled Child. Because I thought everybody talks about unconditional parenting, but I wanted to have a different angle. I read that book last weekend and just reminded again how absolutely radical he is, and really, truly radical in his view of children and education. And he talks in the last chapter of that book about raising reflective rebels, raising kids who won't be quiet if something's not fair or just, and will stand up and say something when someone's being bullied or whatever. This kind of parenting, he talks about it, and you and I both talk about, starts at home, allowing your child to question you and talk back to you. And this is their practice for going out in the world and standing up for what's right.
Yeah, and following those special interests where they're taking them and really championing their weird, that their ideas are so valuable and so important.
Well, thanks for organizing
thank you,
this.
Sarah.
It was fun to talk to you, and we should do it again.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you for joining Atypical Kids Mindful Parents. I really appreciate you walking alongside me